Welcome. My name is James Jansen. I'm Vice President for Academic and Student Affairs here at Shoreline Community College. So welcome today. It is my great pleasure to introduce Larry Doors, who is going to give us an update on some perspectives on changes taking place in Myanmar, or Burma as we often know it, as it's sometimes called today. Myanmar is a sovereign state of some 60 million people in Southeast Asia. It's bordered by China, Thailand, India, Laos, and Bangladesh. Probably still better known as Burma, its name was changed in 1989 by the military government at that time to Myanmar. The renaming remains a contested issue today. The country has been under military control since 1962. Beginning in 2011, the military has relinquished some of its control over the government with its release that year of one of Burma's most prominent human rights activists, Aung San Suu Kyi. Whether or not those changes are real and will lead to further changes is the focus of today's discussion. Here to help us make sense of those changes is Larry Doors, a founding board member of the U.S. Campaign for Burma. Larry has been active on behalf of democracy and justice in Burma for more than 20 years. Larry is vice president of New Ground Social Investment, a Seattle-based investment firm that advocates for socially responsible policies. Larry also occasionally teaches economics at area colleges, including right here at Shoreline Community College. I have a couple of housekeeping issues before we proceed. Before I turn the podium over to Mr. Doors, there are a couple of things I wanted to mention. First of all, please turn off or silence your cell phone if you have one. And secondly, in terms of question cards, there will be time for questions, and we ask that you may question directly to Mr. Doors, or you can write the question on one of the question cards in the flyer that you received when you entered the room today. So either way works for us. Mr. Doors will speak for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then we will open the floor for questions for further discussion. Please join me in welcoming Larry Doors.
Thank you very much. Thanks, I appreciate it. And in terms of questions, if you have questions, something that I said that didn't quite make sense, or you want a little clarity, just go ahead, raise your hand. Let's make this as much of a discussion as possible. And the first thing that I want to talk about is why should we care about Burma? And I appreciate that you guys care enough to show up to learn a little bit about it. It's the country, really, in between China and India. And as those two enormous powerhouses grow toward one another, socially, economically, and so forth, the bridge is Burma. And so any infrastructure connections by highway or train between those two enormous and important countries, any of those are going to have to take place through Burma. And so strategically, it has become a very, very important country. It's also been a regional problem in Southeast Asia, and it has held the region back. And Southeast Asia as a region has 600 million people and is one of the fastest growing economic regions in the world as well. So, Burma's been a problem between ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and the rest of the world for years and years. They've been a member of ASEAN now for 16 years, and during that time, it's really been a problem. There are at least 3 million Burmese elsewhere in the region, typically working illegally in Thailand, Malaysia, China, also in Bangladesh. And so there's this illegal immigrant community, so it's a regional issue there. Over the years, during the military control, the public health situation has gotten much worse in the country, and public health was defunded during the military dictatorship. And so one of the things that you have now is the world's most drug-resistant malaria strains are found along the Thai-Burma border. And it hasn't been possible for public health experts from around the world to work on both sides of the border. They've been working on the Thai side, but it's pretty easy for a mosquito to go from one side to the other. And so it hasn't been possible to deal with that big problem. I mean, that's a problem for people all over the world, is the fact that strains of malaria are getting more and more resistant to drugs. So treating that is a problem. When they looked, for instance, at the strains of AIDS that you find in China, all of them except one could be traced back to Burma and intravenous drug use inside Burma. So, you know, again, from a public health point of view, it's been a little bit of a black hole. And when the bird flu was a big concern, and it remains a big concern, again, the lack of sort of a public health infrastructure has been a problem there. So, you know, there are a lot of reasons that it has been a place of concern. It's also worth noting that the fastest growing refugee population in our state is Burmese. And we have several thousand Burmese refugees living here. So the fact that they're our neighbors, they're our new community members, probably means that it's someplace that we should be paying more attention to as well. So the other thing is, you know, the situation has been so stark. You know, essentially you've had a military dictatorship, you've had national popular uprisings with thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of people that were responded to with violence, and thousands of people were killed, especially in 1988. You may be familiar with the monks' uprising in 2007 that was also violently suppressed. And so you have this authoritarian government that's actually, you know, not delivering anything to its citizens. And you can look at other countries with authoritarian regimes, and at least you can argue in those cases, typically, that they've provided a lot of benefit to a lot of their population, and life has gotten better for a lot of their population during the time of, you know, let's just say the Chinese Communist Party, or in Vietnam, where it's very much an authoritarian structure. But many, many people have improved their lives during that time. And unfortunately, during the military regime in Burma, that's not been the case. So what we've kind of felt is that if you can't deal with this situation, where you have an obvious authoritarian regime that's not delivering the goods to its people, if we can't deal with that situation, then how are we going to move on and deal with other countries of concern where at least you can make the argument that some or many people are benefiting? So it's that's another reason that we feel as though dealing with Burma is critically important sooner rather than later. And the last thing is, it really is an amazing country. It's about the size of Texas or France. It's really beautiful. It has the capacity to feed several times, many times its population. The tourism potential is enormous. Its natural resource base is great. Natural gas, some oil, gold, jade, rubies, teak. These are all things, fishery resources, these are all things that Burma has. And also just an amazing group of people who are very, very welcoming. Buddhism is very strong there. The country has a lot to offer the rest of the world, and during its isolation, it just hasn't had the opportunity. So it's an amazing place that's been very troubled, and hopefully now we're seeing a process of bringing these people into proper contact with the whole rest of the world. I hope that that's what's happening. So let me just give you the good news. You know, and we heard just a little about it. But, you know, in 2008, they had a rigged vote to ratify a really bad constitution. And in 2010, they had a rigged election under the terms of that lousy constitution. But the president, who went directly from being a military man to being a civilian by changing his clothes, in fact, has turned out to be a genuine reformer. And we've seen real commitment. We started to hear it in early 2010, that when he first gave a speech to Parliament, it's like, we haven't heard those sorts of words before, really commitment to a reform. And then we started to see actions on that basis. And it's really been amazing. Censorship, which has been comprehensive since 1962, has steadily been reduced. And it's not to the point where it's an absolute free system now, but there are lots of newspapers that are publishing what they feel like and competing for readership. And people, when you go there, people are free to talk to you, and they will talk to you. In past years, they didn't talk to you. They were afraid to talk to you because typically what would happen is that they would be immediately visited by military intelligence after they had a conversation with a foreigner. What were you talking about? What was the purpose? Why are you talking to this person? What's your motivation? And in a situation where there's really has been very little rule of law, and you knew that you could be put in jail arbitrarily, or that if they didn't want to put you in jail, they could take away your business license. They could kick your brother out of college, They could tell your landlord to no longer rent to you. All these sorts of pressure things. So people were scared to death. It's not true anymore. From the moment that you land, people are interested. They want to talk. And this is after decades of self-censorship and fear. So this is, that's the real deal. And it's powerful for people to believe now that they have a chance to be part of the rest of the world. They've been so isolated. So, the thing that struck me, and again, I first went to Burma in 1982, so it's getting to be a while that I've followed Burmese affairs. And what happened was Burma is essentially a central river valley surrounded by mountains. And so geographically, it's really important to note that's a place that can be isolated, right? You look at Vietnam, which has a tremendously long coastline. It's very much more difficult to isolate a country like that. But here you have a single valley surrounded by mountains. Well, that valley is the Irrawaddy River Valley. The Irrawaddy River is the mother water of the country. And there was a Chinese financed dam being built on the Irrawaddy River that many people were concerned about from an environmental point of view. And all the power that was to be generated by it was to go straight to China. So the benefits were pretty hard to describe to Burmese. And so there were, people were upset about this, and there were even demonstrations. And again, the idea of demonstrations in Burma, you take your life in your hands, but that's less and less and less and less true. And so the president announced the suspension of that dam project. That's when I said, there's something real going on here after all these years. That's when we really started to believe that there was something going on. So, Aung San Suu Kyi was freed from house arrest toward the end of 2010. In November 2011, as things processed along, she agreed that she would run in by-elections for parliament. And by-elections are when people who had been elected to parliament had been moved up into the government or, for whatever reason, were no longer in parliament. There were some empty seats. It wasn't a whole parliamentary election. It was 44 seats out of more than 600 in all of parliament. She agreed to run. Within a month, Hillary Clinton visited Burma. The U.S. Secretary of State visiting Burma. We've been at loggerheads with that country and the military regime for decades. So, it was amazing. And in the event, April 1st of 2012 was when they held these by-elections. And Aung San Suu Kyi won her seat, and her party won 43 of the 45 seats that were available. So, and that surprised a lot of people because these elections were essentially run in a free and open manner, in a proper manner. And she won. So then she traveled abroad for the first time in the summer of 2012. And first went to Thailand, next door, but then went to Europe. And she went to Norway, and she received her 1991 Nobel Peace Prize. And her speech, it's a beautiful speech, and it's easily found online, YouTube. And it reflects the fact that she had 21 years to think about it, and many of those were under house arrest when she was by herself. But it's really it's a wonderful speech, and I would urge everybody to go ahead and check that out. And then you came to September of this past year, she came to the United States. She came to the Congress, and I was honored to be there in the rotunda at the Capitol with all these wonderful people, many of whom had been colleagues working, on behalf of Burma all these years, and then lots of politicians who were nice to each other that day. You had Nancy Pelosi saying nice things about Mitch McConnell, and Mitch McConnell saying nice things about Dianne Feinstein. And John McCain, I think, gave the best speech that day. But it was kind of, it was almost like, hey, mom's here, we better be nice. She was sort of just this presence, put everybody in the right frame of mind. So it was wonderful, it was wonderful. Aung San Suu Kyi was secretly here in Seattle for 2 days during that time. And that's all I'll say about that, but that's the truth. So, then we've gone through this process of progress. And, now we've got a new foreign investment law. We've got a new cell phone law, right? Cell phones are barely penetrated. The internet is barely penetrated there. But sometimes you have the opportunity to leapfrog technologies. So they never really hardwired the country for telephones. Now they're not going to. There's this opportunity for the country to leap forward. There's all this optimism. And I think, frankly, the optimism is fed by a couple of things that take it too far. The optimism is beyond what the reality supports. And there are a couple of things. Did anybody see the State of the Union talk last night? So Burma was mentioned in there, Aung San Suu Kyi, and the fact that Barack Obama, which I didn't mention, but Barack Obama went last December and spoke in Burma, the US president going to Burma. He spoke at Rangoon University, where in 1962, when there was the coup, the first thing that Ne Win, the general, did was blow up the student union building on that campus with the students inside, So and they had shuttered that campus since 1996. It was all overgrown with weeds and hadn't been painted and all that until he said he was going to come and he was going to speak there. So it was symbolically tremendous, and it was a very good speech. So we mentioned it last night. Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama have both said at various times that Burma is their #1 foreign policy success from the first term of the administration. So they have a vested interest in the good narrative. Everything's going right. Everything's going well. There are a lot of companies that want to do business there. It's a natural resource-rich place. They have a vested interest, and through an organization called US ASEAN Business Council, they spend a lot of money helping to tell that positive story. So, and just naturally, we want to feel good about something that we've worked hard on, and things are better, But it's a little bit of a pendulum swing, and the pendulum, in terms of public perception, has gotten ahead of the reality. So it's not, as Stephen Colbert would say, problem solved. It's not that simple, unfortunately. So here's the other side of it. The other side is that when you're in Yangon or Rangoon, there are new names for different places, just like Myanmar versus Burma. When you're in Yangon, you feel the changes. They're real. You go 30 miles outside of the city, and you begin to feel like those changes are fading away. You go up into the mountains, where 35 to 40% of the population, most of whom are not of the Burman ethnic group but are ethnic minorities, where those people live, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed, and it's a very serious, ongoing human rights situation for anyone living in all those mountains all the way around. And remember, that's where the natural resources are that, that everybody's thinking about getting their hands on. So in northern Kachin State, there's a war on. There are 100,000 people displaced right now. There's fighting every day, killing every day. And the Burma Army has a practice, long-standing practice of attacking civilians. And that's what they're doing. And it just continues. And it's of substantial concern. There will be some peace talks in Chiang Mai and Thailand in coming days. The Chinese are actually very worried because the displaced people are close to the China border. And if things get worse, tens of thousands will be crossing, into China as refugees. China doesn't want that. So there's quite a dynamic going on there. But it's, terribly worrisome. Twice, the president has called for the army to stop its attacks in Kachin State, twice. And neither time has it made any difference whatsoever. That points up the fact that the army is outside of the control of the civilian government. Go back to that 2008 Constitution. The army is independent financially and independent politically. So right now you have the civilian government doing lots of good things, sort of as best it can. But this army that ran the country for decades continues to wield an awful lot of power. So how far can you push it in a situation like that before the army reacts? And that's the delicate dance that everybody is doing in that situation right now. So you'd say, well, here's an obvious solution. Change the Constitution, right? It's a problem Constitution. We have an elected government. Well, in the Constitution, it says if you want to change the Constitution, you need a 75% vote in Parliament. And in the Constitution, it says the military gets to appoint 25% of the members of Parliament. So essentially, in the Constitution is an army veto against changing the Constitution. That's a big problem. And it's, that's just one of many problems in that Constitution. Another one is anyone who has been married to a foreigner cannot become president of the country. Well, who might that refer to? Aung San Suu Kyi was married to a British academic, so it refers to her. So essentially the Constitution has a particular provision that suggests that she can't become president of the country. Well, the next national, yes, Larry? Doesn't matter. No, has been. Yeah. The wording is such. The wording is such that she is not excluded from that one. So the next national elections are 2015. And she wants to win those, right? She just, in the by-elections, won 43 of 45 seats. There's a lot of reasons that she should have a lot of confidence that in a free and fair election, she and her party will win. And then what do we do? Because obviously she's the figurehead, she's the leader of the party. But if she can't be president, then how do we negotiate that? So we have a couple of years yet, that's all. A couple of years to try to figure out what's going to happen. So, and then in general, there's a lack of capacity to implement these announced reforms. The reforms are great. They're really lots of good things. There's a lot of sincerity. A lot of people want these reforms to be successful. But unfortunately, you have a political culture based on decades where actually doing something, actually taking initiative was profoundly discouraged, right? This is no way to be successful in your bureaucratic career was to do something on your own. You always pushed it up and up and up to get approval and be told what to do. So that's not a good recipe for implementing lots and lots and lots of dynamic reforms and joining the global economy and so on and so forth. Larry sent me this email yesterday, and a bunch of institutions of higher learning in the United States are involved in trying to help revamp and revitalize the higher education system there. It's a great idea. It also is a real uphill struggle because much of the dissident movements started on campuses. So what did the military do? They defunded education. They decentralized education because they didn't want too many people to be in one place. So the education system, I've met people from Nepal who went, to med school at Rangoon University because it was a magnet. It was an excellent university. That was a long time ago, and now their education system is on its knees, and they really, they need all this help. But these things don't change overnight. The corruption index, right? Burma has been in the bottom 5 in the world. The index of economic freedom, bottom 5 in the world. These things don't change overnight. These things are going to take a long time. And that's not a narrative that everybody is very comfortable with. Oh, it's going to be hard. No, it's much more problem solved, right? Let's move on to the next one. And so, that's going to continue to be a problem. The other thing is, in 1962, they nationalized all the land. So land ownership, people who've been farming land for generations, they don't own their land. And now, big, powerful people, including many members of parliament, are simply coming in with thugs and stealing land, and then turning around and selling it to people who want to put up garment factories and things like that. That's a really big issue, and that's something that with my day job as a socially responsible investor, we've been talking with companies about. And that it's not that simple to just go off to Burma and do business. You really have to think twice, 3, 4, 5 times about your due diligence. Who are you doing business with? Under what circumstances? So, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Citizenship laws, again, for the ethnic minorities, many of them don't have citizenship. So, from a bureaucratic point of view, if you didn't exist, if you didn't have ID, how can you borrow money? How can you become politically involved? How can you do all sorts of things? It's one of these things that we probably struggle to empathize with because, that's so far from our reality. But not even having an identity. And that's a long process. It's a hard thing to do. So these are all these challenges. And then the other one that I have to mention is the Rohingya. You may have heard of the Rohingya, are a Muslim community living in Western Burma. And the language that they speak is Bengali, similar to people from Bangladesh. And as far as most Burmese are concerned, they're illegal immigrants from Bangladesh. They don't deserve citizenship. And it's also a little it's been shocking to me to see the extent to which they're disrespected. You may be familiar with the Roma or the Gypsies in Europe, and that they're always considered outsiders, and it's maybe a chicken or egg question. Their behaviors, is that because they've been excluded from society, or are they excluded from the society because of some of the things that they do? It's a little similar that way, but everybody hates the Rohingya. And they don't want them in Bangladesh. Bangladesh doesn't consider them to be Bangladeshis. Nobody wants them. They've been trying to escape by boat, and thousands and thousands and thousands have been doing that, and ending up in Malaysia, which is a Muslim country, creates a certain amount of opportunity for them, but not very much. And they're not welcomed there, and they're certainly not welcomed in Thailand, which has its own problems with the Muslim community in southern Thailand. That's ethnic Malay and not Thai. So, this is a huge problem, and it's a human rights problem. Everybody has the right, to not simply be driven out of their village, the village burned, and shot if they come back. But that's the kind of situation that people find themselves in. Aung San Suu Kyi, who's been an icon, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, she won't speak on this topic because she's now a politician. She's now trying to win the 2015 elections. And if she were to stand with the Rohingya, she would kill her chances of winning the 2015 elections. And she could rationalize it, and I'm sure she does, the best thing for the Rohingya and the best thing for the Kachin, because she hasn't really stood up for the Kachin who are being attacked in the north, the best thing is for her to win that election and for her party to win that election. That's probably true. But that's a slippery slope, right? You start rationalizing, well, I won't say anything, I won't do anything because I'm going to win the election. And then politicians rationalize stuff like that all the time. So it's been very interesting to see her transition from icon to practicing politician. It's not easy. I'm sure it really hurts. But that's the situation. Yes, Larry.
In a country of about 60 million, how large are these two minority populations?
Yeah, the Rohingya are a little less than 1 million, perhaps, so a relatively small amount. But it's an excellent point because the minority population, 35 to 40% overall, and that's the Karen, the Shan, the Kachin, the Chin, so the ethnic minority population is actually quite enormous. And you go to Thailand, for instance, the ethnic minority population is 2%. Or in China, it's very small. Or in Vietnam, it's a very small percentage. But when it's more than a third of your population, you have to deal with it politically. And unfortunately, that's sort of the Army's sphere of influence, are these areas along the borders and in the mountains. And they deal with this political problem as a military problem. And, and that's why some people have described what's gone on in the mountains as a slow motion genocide for many, many years. It's been a tremendously ugly situation with rape, torture, murder, commonplace. And that's what continues right now. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, the question is really about who stands for the ethnic minorities, and I can say this: nobody stands for the Rohingya. And this morning, there were pictures of monks who were marching in support of the government, which takes a very hard line on the Rohingya. So, I would say in that case, I don't want to step there. I would say in that case, it's a matter of their Burman identity being stronger than their Buddhist identity. So nobody stands for them. When it comes to the other ethnic minorities, it's a less of an issue, but it's still a major concern because over decades, the government propaganda has been these are terrorists, and these ethnic minority people don't have a full rounded personality. They're nothing but terrorists. And so in the thinking of the Burman community, there's still a long way to go to understand the need to accommodate a third of your population or more. It's a big problem. It's the biggest problem that they face in Burma. Say that again? Mm-hmm. Yeah, in terms of the question about the UN supporting the minorities, not very much. The UN has managed to bring, for instance, some relief supplies to some of the tens of thousands of Kachin in the north 2 times. 2 times. So there's no real regular support inside the country. It's it's an unfortunate thing. The UN Refugee Agency can't do anything about it because these people are all inside their country. You're not a refugee by the legal term if you haven't left the country. So there are, and therefore they need the cooperation of the host government to be able to do anything. And the host government is not interested in cooperation. So unfortunately, the UN has not been very helpful. Yes? Yeah, it's the question is with the Rohingya, like, what should they do? What can they do? And it's a great question. You know, basically they're stateless people. No one will recognize that they belong in whatever country, so 250,000 of them live in squalid camps just on the other side in Bangladesh, and where they're not welcome. And they're not welcome, and they're not welcome, and they've been voted to Indonesia, and they're not welcome, you know. So it's an enormous, you know, what they really need to do is to be able to stay where they've lived. Most of them, some of them are illegal immigrants from Bangladesh, but most of them have lived for a long time. And they, you know, what they really need to be able to do is stay there. But that takes working something out with the Burmese government. Their leadership is not clear, no. So, which is obviously a problem. Yeah, I mean, why are they so despised? I'm vexed by that question. It's been, you know, again, I'm chair of the board of U.S. Campaign for Burma. We had a disagreement with our previous executive director, who was an ethnic Burman, and he felt it necessary to leave the organization over this question. So, and the Canadian Friends of Burma, another organization, the executive director is still there and the whole board of directors is gone over this question. So it's really a tough one. So you can, you know, this is where you can really see Aung San Suu Kyi, why are you not speaking up? Well, right, because this is such a divisive issue that it would ruin her political career that she's now committed to. So I wish I could give you a good answer to the question, and I cannot, but I can say it's profoundly difficult for all of us, even people who were political prisoners, and we, you know, took action for them for years and years and years and years. They got out of prison, and not quite the first thing they were saying is, these Rohingya bastards have no place in our country, right? Well, how does, you know, that's a problem. And so I wish I could answer your question. So far I don't have a good answer to that. You had a question? Yeah, that's an excellent question. Within the National League for Democracy, which is her party, you know, what's the next generation of leadership? And it's still developing. Many of them are what are called the 88 generation of students. The big national uprising in 1988, which is dramatized in the movie Beyond Rangoon that you can borrow from the library. Many of those students, many of whom spent many, many years in prison, were tortured, were held in solitary confinement. Many of those people, they're tremendous. I just heard a story, Kojimi, one of those. I don't know if anybody heard a story on Sunday. It was on one of the national public radio shows, storytelling, and they were doing love stories because it's the week of Valentine's Day. And they talked about this couple, both of whom were political activists in Burma, and through their imprisonment, decades long, including just after when they had their child, they were both arrested again. You know, they stuck with it. So many of these people have stuck with it, and they're the ones who are appearing to be the next generation of leadership. And 88 generation students, you know, they're not young. Because that was, you know, that was quite a while ago. So yeah, but nonetheless, that's a really big issue because the separation between Aung San Suu Kyi and her party members has been profound. She was under house arrest, and since 2003 until 2010, she was completely incommunicado under house arrest. No visitors, no letters in, no letters out. You know, so. You know, it's a real issue, and she can't do it all. You know, she can't do it all, and so she's carrying a tremendous amount of pressure, and she's working very hard on that particular issue. I think you had a question. Yeah, it's, there are a couple of things as far as U.S. priorities. One was that Burma had become very much within the orbit of China. And that was felt not to be in the U.S. interest because our best ally in the region is Thailand next door. And so that was really driving a lot of the Obama administration's reaching out and trying to engage and moving so quickly on this is to help move it out of the orbit of China. The other thing of concern is, and this is just to recap the question, what are the U.S. interests there and how are we acting on them? Another one was cooperation with North Korea and concerns over a nuclear program. 2010, there was a lot of news that came about secret tunnels that had been built inside Burma by North Korean engineers, shipments coming from North Korea into Burma. So there has been a lot of concern about that, and that continues to be a real U.S. policy priority in that relationship with North Korea. So that's a pretty strong one. Yeah, and then the natural resources, the opportunity for U.S. companies to get in there and do business. Chevron is the one U.S. company that has been active there. One of the members of the board of directors of the Chevron Corporation, Chuck Hagel, right? So, and one of the previous members of the board of directors of the Chevron Corporation, Condoleezza Rice. So Chevron has some ins, and despite, I think, their very poor behavior in Burma, they're still there, and that is influencing U.S. policy as well. That's, so is it socially responsible to invest in Burma? The argument that we make, and we've been, this is something that I want to make sure that I get to, for the first time, the State Department has said to foreign investors, in order to be consistent with U.S. national policy aims, we have some expectations of you. And those are particularly around reporting on your due diligence, on the human rights situation throughout your supply chain. This is, to me, and I've been working on this a long time, this is really important. This is the first time that the State Department is saying to foreign investors, you have a role in our foreign policy, and too often foreign investors have undermined U.S. policy goals when they've gone off to other countries. So if we can be successful with this, I feel as though we will have made a contribution to something bigger. So to answer your question, I would say if you engage in very, very high levels of due diligence, who's your partner? What's their background? What are the social and environmental conditions of your manufacturing? Whose land is it on? You got to go through all these things. I was on a panel with the Coca-Cola representative who's responsible for opening up Burma. By the way, not to make much money, but to take off their list of the 3 countries in the world where they're not doing business: Burma, North Korea, and Cuba. Now they'll be down to 2, right? That's the priority, because they're not going to make a ton of money selling sugar water in Burma. But they've done 4 rounds of due diligence on identifying their partner, to just keep going back and looking deeper and deeper into their partner. Is he, in this case a he, has he been involved in narcotics trafficking? Right? Burma continues to be the #2 producer of opiates in the world. It's the #1 exporter of methamphetamine in the world. So it's a big, that's a big issue. So they're going through this very, very serious process. If you do that, then I would say yes, it's reasonable and responsible to do business. Failing that, I would say no. Yes, extreme. Right, a constitution that's riddled with holes, right. Yeah, so how can you be sure? And honestly, I would say I'm not sure. I don't believe that you can be sure. But I do think that by engaging in this kind of due diligence and being transparent about it, so that investors like ourselves can make wise decisions as to whether we want to invest in Chevron or Coca-Cola or whatever company it is regarding what they're doing there. That's the best we can do. And certainly investment when it's done right is very helpful, and it disperses money and gives people the opportunity to better themselves and to support the education of their family members and all these sorts of things. So our hope is that it can be done responsibly, but it's really everybody has to recognize right up front that investing successfully in Burma is going to be a challenge. And if you're not willing to accept that fact, then you're not going to do it responsibly. So we need everybody to get to the point where we're dealing with reality and not what we wish were the case. And unfortunately, we're still stuck a little bit with us living in the dream world. But I think these State Department rules that are supposed to be published on April 1st will be very, very helpful. And it's the first time, and to me, that's a really exciting step toward all of us working together in support of legitimate U.S. policy goals, which are democratization, protection of human rights, and pulling the country a little bit out of China's orbit and North Korea's orbit. Another question. That's yeah. So will democracy, the development of democracy in Burma, affect the relationship between China and Burma? Very, very interesting question. Some of the Time magazine reporter who covers Burma, she lives in Beijing. So she said as soon as the flight landed in Yangon, she went to her Facebook page, and she could update her Facebook page. She couldn't do that in Beijing. So what you're seeing now is, in certain ways, in certain aspects, Burma has become more open than China. And will it influence China? I don't think so. But the changing relationship will be very interesting. Up until this point, the Chinese investors in particular, just like this dam project, they didn't have to tell their story. They didn't have to convince the Burmese people, this is good for you. They didn't have to. They just made a deal with the military. Anybody who gets in the way, is going to get hurt. So you better not get in the way. There's no discussion. There's no public relations. There's no relationship. And so I think the change will be that the Chinese community, whether you're talking politically or as the investors, will have to have this conversation and explain why is it good that we're here, right? And we have to tell this story. And that's a challenge. That's a different dynamic than before. And so to me, that's where the biggest change will come. In the end, Burma will always be closer to China because it's closer to China, right? It has a big, long border with Yunnan province. So I think that's understood. But the conversations will be different as Burma becomes a little more open. Yeah, that's a great question. Is why would this president essentially decide autonomously to reform? And I think that to my opinion is really two reasons. One is that they simply felt too close, pulled too close, and being too dependent on one country, and that's China. So too close, too much dependency there, and they felt that was not good politics. And that over time they might even lose some independence or autonomy that way. But the other is that simply you can take a 40-minute plane ride from Yangon to Bangkok and you go 40 years in 40 minutes. It's unbelievable. The difference between the lives of people on one side of that mountain range and on the other side, and they actually have similar geographies and similar opportunities for, you know, the resources in per capita in Burma are even better than in Thailand. So they were just falling behind. And as they, you know, as they were less isolated and moved around a little bit and saw, gosh, you go to Kuala Lumpur, you go to Jakarta, you go to Manila, you know, it's completely different, and that was wrong, and that's something that was only going to get worse. So that's my opinion on why that why the self-reforming has been undertaken by some aspects, right? It's because some in the Army don't care, but in the civilian leadership, they do care.
Anybody want to ask the last question? Any thoughts you want me to listen there?
We got one more.
You used a word earlier that caught my attention, corruption. You said that Burma was in the bottom 5 countries as far as corruption is concerned. And I just wondered if you go into a little more detail about that and how, either what or who or what part of the country was considered corrupt and how it was measured, and then how does it affect or hinder Burma's progression towards providing this?
Sure. So just drilling down into the whole corruption issue, you know, who does the measuring, and you know, as I was walking in, I was like, because I know Freedom House does their you know index of freedom, and I can't remember, but you can find it actually online, the corruption index. And you'll also find their methodology. In Burma, you know, the military has had complete control, and it's either been active military officers or retired military officers who have run these big conglomerates that then do all the business. And so the only way to do business has been to have a military partner, or his son often, and to whom you pay lots of money for very little except the permission to do business. So essentially you just have to buy permission to do business, and even that has only been open to a small number of cronies who, you know, have sort of developed these relationships. So essentially it just limits the opportunities for a very entrepreneurial and very intelligent group of people. You know, they just don't have the opportunity to start businesses, to compete, and so, you know, that's been a really major contributor to the holding back of the economy. But I'd be happy to talk with you. Who does that index? I'll find it and get it to you.
Round of applause.
Thanks.
The Vice President had to leave for another meeting. Say what? So anyways, but thank you all very much. I knew you were here. For coming, and we'll be having other events like this during the day. The next one is scheduled at the end of February. I think it's February 27th. It will be held in the 1000 building, not in the same building, but right across the way. One of our professors, Mimi Harvey, is going to be speaking about her work with immigrant labor in South Korea. So hope you can join us for that one too. And we have evening speakers series going on right now, and I'll be happy to give you the details on that, or take a look at our website on Shoreline, www.shoreline.edu/GAC, and you can find out all the details in that. Thank you again for coming today.